Okay, let's see how this goes. Typical of me, I am way behind any kind of trend, but for some time now I've been meaning to record a sort of follow-up to probably my most popular video on this channel about best RPGs for beginners. I didn't put in the title of it best RPGs for beginners that aren't D&D, and I probably should have, because that's a way clickbaity title that people would probably have clicked on. So I may put it in this title. You know, you'll know better than me because you'll be seeing this. It's also worth noting, I'm recording this on January 7th, and my assumption is that this will not be on YouTube till the middle of the month, would be my guess, for various technical reasons of the way I record and present. I also think this will be at least a two-part video. So hopefully you enjoy taking a look at some of this stuff. A few other things to get out of the way early on. I'm not sponsored. However, if anybody involved with Moxie, or, and I'm going to pronounce this terribly, Kaloa, this is completely invisible apparently on the camera, but this is a Hawaiian coffee rum that is delicious and makes an amazing mixed drink with Moxie. So if anybody wants to sponsor me just by sending me some of that free stuff, that'd be swell, and I'd be A-okay with that. I'm going to drink it out of my Star Trek glass. Oh, that's good stuff. Also, along with sponsoring, which nobody's doing, check out my Patreon. The link is below. It's to help me with my writing, but it also helps me a lot with doing these videos, in spite of what you're looking at technically, which, you know, that's also a fun thing. You go back and look at that earlier video about RPGs, and it's not like I've gotten any better at this. I haven't. So, anyway, what I'm going to talk about today is alternatives to Dungeons and Dragons. Now, these are not necessarily good for beginners. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Don't know. I mean, I might mention it on the way through, but I'm going to talk about RPGs that are good alternatives to Dungeons and Dragons because of all of this stuff. Again, recording on January 7th. I don't know what will have happened between now and when you're seeing this video. But there's all kinds of chaos, and, you know, chaos is always an exciting time. The last 6 years. So, I'm going to start off, and oh, one more caveat. These are all games that I own. They're not necessarily all games that I have experience with. So, I'll talk about whether or not I do as I go through them, but they're all games that I own. Yeah, there are other games out there, but this is not going to be one of those lists where it's like, oh, you want to try something other than D&D? Well, here's a D&D clone. I'm not going to do that. So there's not like a lot of the OSR games in here. There's nothing wrong with that. That's your bag. That's great. I don't want to recreate the feeling of the role-playing games of the early 80s because a lot of times I didn't really like them. Part of why it took me a while to get into the hobby. So, but I get it. I get the thing, and there's vibes from that time that I like. So anyway, I'm going to talk about a few games here. So starting up, if you wanted to move from Dungeons and Dragons to something else, I'm also sticking with fantasy early on, probably for this video. If I do a second one, I'll talk about other stuff. But if you want to move to Dungeons and Dragons and or move on from Dungeons and Dragons and you don't want to go too far, you don't want to stray too far off of what you know, but you want something else, I highly recommend Dungeon Crawl Classics. Now, this does do a lot to recreate the vibe of those early RPGs, very much the 70s van art. That's how I usually end up describing it. This is, you know, Frank Frazetta cover on a Molly Hatchet album or whatever. You know, this is listening to prog rock in the back of a van with a couch in it, you know, that kind of thing. This is that very mid-70s, early 80s, the movie Wizards from Ralph Bakshi. It's super trippy and bizarre. It has great adventures. Goodman Games is a very pro-gamer company. They do a lot of very positive things. They're very sort of like community-oriented, if you want to say that. They have a lot of things that are not super expensive. There are a lot of ways to get into Dungeon Crawl Classics without dropping a ton of money. They frequently do bundles of holding that are great deals if you like PDFs. They're, I think, a very good company. very forward-looking about a lot of stuff, but rear-looking when it comes to the overall spirit and atmosphere of their game. I also kind of think of this as being a little bit less of like a role-playing, storytelling kind of game, and a little bit more of a fun adventure game in which half the fun is seeing what crazy thing happens to your character, not so much about like character development and stuff like that. Not to say there's none of that, but I don't feel like that is what this game is about. This game is about crazy, crazy stuff happening, your character getting turned into a half-toad and, you know, getting warped into another universe and coming back with glowing green eyes. I mean, who knows what's going to go on. It's nuts. But tons of fun. Highly recommend this game, especially if you don't want to go too far from your Dungeons & Dragons traditional fantasy kind of tropes, but still kick it up into a strange new world. Up next, talking about still staying within that same general realm, orcs, goblins, dwarves, whatever, magic, the whole thing, level-based, class-based system, sort of. I want to talk about Earthdawn. So Earthdawn is a game that I played a great deal of back in the 90s. I was in a 2-year campaign of Earthdawn, had a ton of fun. For a long time, I said that if I ever was going to run anything even adjacent to Dungeons & Dragons, it would be Earthdawn. I have changed that now. I would say it would be Dungeon Crawl Classics. But that said, Earthdawn was very interesting. Now, it is on its, I believe, 4th edition now. I do not have any newer editions than this, which I believe is the first. I can't speak to where it's at now, but it is still out. It is still available. It's still an active game. It has a devoted fan base. It's a really neat thing. And I don't know, sort of trivia, this was originally the kind of prehistory of the Shadowrun role-playing game. Not the same system, but the idea is, you know, with Shadowrun, magic was coming back into the world in a sort of cyberpunk setting. Earthdawn is the last time magic was in the world. It's also kind of a post-Lovecraftian mythos apocalypse setting. It's a fantasy setting in which horrible cosmic entities ruled the world, and all of the other peoples hid underground. Those things have gone away, mostly, and the people who've been living underground have come out into a now sort of post-apocalyptic fantasy version of sort of the Near East, kind of. And when I say sort of fantasy version, it's a little bit like Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Age, where Conan lived, which is a fantastical vision of a prehistoric Earth that blends in later cultures and things like that. Well, that's sort of what the era in Earthdawn is like. So they're very different individually, but that's the idea. So Earthdawn. Those are both fairly D&D adjacent. They will be familiar. There will be aspects of them that will be familiar. The way they handle levels in this, they're called circles, I always thought was very interesting. And tying in a little bit to a game I'll mention later on, everybody is sort of magical in this. Your warrior, for example, is really more like a warrior out of a martial arts film, where part of their martial skill is essentially a kind of magic. So everybody is imbued with a certain level of a sort of magical essence, that kind of thing. And each class, whatever you want to call it, each of those, I don't remember the terminology, but each one focuses that kind of magic into a different way. So it's really interesting. As you go up in circles or levels, you attune to that magic in different ways, and your warrior becomes more able to do more crazy stunts and things like that as part of who they are. Anyway, it was neat. I thought it was a really cool way to handle class system, because I don't normally care for class system games. That's never been my sort of thing. So I thought they did a really cool job of handling it in a unique way that is tied into the setting. Coming up after that, this may be my favorite fantasy RPG. I absolutely love Ars Magica. It is very specific. I've done a couple of videos on it before. You can go back and look at those if you'd like. But this is medieval Europe as seen through the eyes of medieval Europeans. It is mythic Europe, a fantasy version of Europe. And depending on how you turn that dial, it could be more toward the history or more toward the fantastical, but it is a fantasy version of medieval Europe in which there is a secret society of wizards called the Order of Hermes. They run magic in Europe. And your character, you play these wizards. Now, you also play other characters because it's done in such a way that you end up, your core character is a wizard, you have a secondary character who's not a wizard, and how you use them is its own thing. They're a very important character as well. And then you also play grogs, which are basically peasants of various levels of training, oftentimes kind of like zero-level characters in Dungeon Crawl Classics. They aren't long for the world, typically, because they're very good at taking an arrow for a wizard, not so good about anything else. So Ars Magica, I think, is just a phenomenal game. I think the 5th edition, I have not played the 5th edition. We played some kind of weird hodgepodge of 2nd and 3rd edition, and then mixed in elements of 4th edition when it came out. And so that's what I have most experience with. And I found the game a little unapproachable at that time. I loved playing in it, but I had a hard time with it. 5th edition, when I read through this book, I was like, I get it now. I feel like I could run this game out of 5th edition in a way I did not feel with 3rd edition, etc. So Ars Magica, I absolutely love this game, but it's a doozy. This is not for beginners. Not to say that a beginner couldn't enjoy themselves, especially playing a grog and maybe work their way into it, but I think as somebody, if you were thinking about running this game, I think generally speaking, it's probably a better game for experienced people who have experience with RPGs. So, but Ars Magica, great game. Still in print, in the same edition as far as I know, Castle Falkenstein from R. Telsorian, the people who put out Cyberpunk 2020 and now Cyberpunk Red, connected in with the Cyberpunk 2077 game. They also put out the Witcher RPG. Castle Falkenstein is it came out when the term steampunk really was starting to get bandied about. It's not really steampunk, but it's like steampunk adjacent as much as whatever that even means. But it came out after Space 1899, whatever it's called. It came out later after that, but it's got a very different vibe, much more magical, much more sort of mystical. It is a very fanciful version of kind of Victorian Europe, sort of, where you have, again, elves and dwarves and things like that. There's like clockwork things, and there's blimps flying around, and there are dragons. There's all kinds of stuff, and it's a much heavier on the storytelling and the character building and that sort of thing than on combat or that sort of thing. It also doesn't use dice because dice are not used by gentlemen. So it's, polite society used cards. So it uses a card system that I thought worked very well. I played in a campaign for a little while, which I genuinely loved. Also, it has some beautiful art. There's some full color in the beginning. I don't know if that's still true of the version that's in print now on that you can buy from Art Telsorian. I don't know. This is my original copy. But it also has some nice black and white art. But I think I was saying something about it. I don't remember what it was. But this is a very cool game, and I think well worth having in your collection. It also has a few supplements that are very cool. I'm using this kind of as a placeholder. This is the Quick Start Edition for Basic Role-Playing. Basic Role-Playing, if I had to pick only one game system, it would be Basic Role-Playing. It is exceptionally versatile for using all kinds of different... It's not generic, it's not one-size-fits-all or anything like that, but it is extremely versatile. You can use it for so much, and it's just really good. I think it's great for sci-fi. I think it's very good for grittier fantasy. This is very much not like D&D. This is not heroic fantasy, because no matter how good you are, you could be in year 5 of your campaign. You've been playing the same character since the beginning. Your character is highly skilled. They're excellent at everything. They're smart. They're clever. They do all kinds of things right. They've won many a battle. and the lowliest of lowly foe could still take you out with one shot because your hit points never go up. Your body is always fragile, and you can die at any time, which it means combat is something, like in the real world, to be avoided if possible, if you're interested in living. So I really like basic role-playing for a lot of reasons. It's the game I got started with, so it'll always have a fond place in my heart. But I also find myself going back to it a lot. It's the basis for Call of Cthulhu, probably my single favorite RPG. It's just a great system. Now, right now, the full version of this is not available in print. I've heard from, I believe it was from Chaosium, that they are planning to do a new printing of it, but that is down the road in the pipeline and not something coming up right off. I don't love this Quick Start edition, going to be honest. It does a lot of things where it refers to the full game, which is currently unavailable in physical copy. I think you can still get the PDF. I don't do PDFs. So I don't love this for some reasons like that, especially because the original basic role-playing was actually if you can imagine, a thinner book than this and had the complete rules. So the fact that this Quick Start doesn't have the complete rules and continually references the full, big, thick version of the book, that makes me nervous. I don't have the big version of the book, and I kind of wonder why is it so sizable? I don't know. It seems like too much for a system that is so simple and easy. But again, I don't have it. I don't own it. We'll see. I'll definitely buy basic role-playing when it gets reprinted. But I don't know. But I love the system. Can't recommend that highly enough. Now, one that's a real blast from the past, but I only mention it because they kickstarted a new edition of it that is available, apparently. It's just far more money than I am willing to pay for it. However, I figured I would mention it just in case somebody else is interested in it. I have not checked out the new edition of Everway, but the original edition of Everway, which the last time I looked went for stupidly high prices on the collector market, the original edition of Everway was great. I absolutely loved this. This is as far away from D&D almost as it gets. To say this is not a crunchy system would be an understatement. It has almost no crunch. No dice, uses tarot cards, it uses art cards for character creation. It is almost a new agey, weird kind of thing. Very 90s in its way, but very good. And I think as a mechanic, you could use this to run other types of games in the sort of weird, sort of new agey vibe of this system. It's hard to explain, but I had somebody was putting together a Fading Suns science fiction, kind of like Dune meets Star Wars. They were putting together a game of that using Everway, which actually made a lot of sense, where it was a lot about the passion play and about the politics and all of that kind of thing, that I think that this worked better for, not so much combat, that kind of thing. So Everway is it's a fascinating artifact from a different time, and I'm really curious about the new edition. I just can't justify spending the money on it, especially because I haven't had Everway at the table since the mid-90s. This was actually from Wizards of the Coast, if you can believe that. This is back when they made games other than Magic and D&D. They started out as a pretty good game company, actually. So those are games that I have played, maybe not recently, but I have played, I have definite experience with, and I own copies of it. I think I'm going to end this video here because I'm getting close to the 20-minute mark, and these videos don't do well if I run too much longer than that. My recording device doesn't like it. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll do a part 2, which will be games that, well, you'll see. So see you in part 2. Check out links below for whatever. Maybe I'll link some of these. I'm not sure. So anyway, take care.